Okay, so before I take the occasion to first thank the, as Philippe Flageolet would say, les organisatrices for this beautiful meeting. And I will also take the opportunity of starting with an advertisement. So as some of you might know and have received my spam, together with Ivan Corwin, Rémi Rod, and Vincent Vargas, we are organizing a school in a 2-week school in, on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea in Cargèse, in Corsica, about some recent developments still at the interface between theoretical physics and probability theory. Maybe not so much on the topic of random maps, which was my subject, but on two very active fields. So first one is what people usually call integrable probability. And the other topic is conformal field theories, and conformal field theories is related to Liouville theory and random maps, by the way. So let me just show the program. So there will be mini courses and research talks, and I will just list the mini courses. There will be a mini course by Alexei Borodin, by Alice Guillonnet, and so this one will be somewhat related to random maps because it will be about topological expansions. Andreas Portiello, and in the second week there will be Antti Kupiainen about the Liouville quantum gravity, Sylvain Ribaud, and Steve Zeldjic. And so I would, the registration are open, and I would like to encourage people to apply, especially students and postdocs. And we have a bit of financial support to, for participants. So and the registration deadline is end of June, so don't do it too late. Okay, so now this is the end of the announcement, and I will go to my talk. Okay. So it's about nesting statistics in the ON loop model on random planar maps. And it's based on joint work. Well, my common collaborator is Gaëtan Borot. And it started with a series of papers that we wrote in 2012 with Emmanuel Guiter. And so we, after some interruption, we came back to this subject. And we made a recent paper with Bertrand Duplantier, who is here, and I will, which will be about nesting statistics in the ON loop model, and I will talk about that. So let me start with the context. So there has been a lot of beautiful talks before me, so I don't need to enter. I hope that you still have in mind the talk by Mireille and by Timothy about random maps. And as Mireille said, there has been a lot of interest, and Mireille's talk was about that, to understand some properties of random maps which have an extra structure. So what in physics we would like to call matter living on the surface. And it's believed in physics, and proven in some cases, that the large-scale properties of these random maps is different from the usual one you find for undecorated random maps. So by large-scale properties, I can mean different things, so critical exponents or scaling limits in the Gromov-Hausdorff sense. So in this sense, for instance, for any reasonable, I would say, reasonable model of maps, the scaling limit you find for undecorated random maps is the Brownian map, and it is expected that you might, in model of maps with matter, you might find other scaling limits. So, more precisely, it's also believed, maybe not at with the same strength level, but still, physicists believe that there is the possible scaling limits, well, in a sense which has to be precise, is indexed by a one parameter. There is a one parameter family of scaling limits. And physicists like to index these scaling limits by the parameter called the central charge, which is a parameter between minus infinity and 1. It cannot go beyond 1 because after that there is some sort of phase transition. Our probabilists like to talk about stochastic Loeffner evolution. And there is the parameter kappa, and there is a relation that I will give later about between kappa and C. Okay. So these are for possible scaling limits, and here I will consider the ON loop model, and why. What is the interest of this ON loop model? Is that it contains n is a parameter, and as you vary the parameter, then you should be able to encompass, to obtain the whole, to scan the whole family as n varies in the range 0, 2. So what is the ON loop model? So it's, well, in concrete terms, so here is what is the ON loop model on a regular lattice, so in particular it's on the honeycomb lattice. So you don't see the edges of the honeycomb lattice, but in the honeycomb lattice you select some edges, which are here displayed in blue, in such a way that the edges that you retain form loops, that is to say, paths which do not intersect, do not branch, so each vertex is either is visited by, there is an edge going in and an edge going out. So you can think here it stops on the boundary because you can think it is on an infinite lattice, and here I just showed a part of this model. And here the parameter n is the weight per loop. So it's to each such configuration you attach a weight which is non-local. So it's one loop, however big it is, receives a weight or fugacity n. And this model can be defined on a regular lattice, but it can also be naturally defined on a random lattice, for instance on a random map. And here is a picture by Nicolas, which gives a rough idea of what we would like to look at. We would like to look at this kind of objects. So here is a big slide about, I take a partial history about the ON model. So why, for instance, why is it called ON? Well, ON thinks, you might think about the orthogonal group, and this is no miracle, because the original appearance of the ON model was in statistical physics by Eugene Stanley. We introduced it as a statistical model where you have spins, the spins, classical spins. So spin would be a unit vector in a n-dimensional Euclidean space. And then you would have a lattice, and to each vertex of the lattice you would associate a spin. And in statistical physics you define a model by giving a Hamiltonian, so an energy assigned to a configuration. And the energy would be this expression, minus j is a coupling constant, times the sum over all edges of the lattice, so sum over nearest neighbor aj in the lattice of the spin at I taken with scalar product with spin at j. And so this Hamiltonian is minimized when when j is positive. It is what we call a ferromagnetic interaction, because this Hamiltonian is minimized when the spins are parallel. So and actually this model is a generalization of the Ising model. The Ising model corresponds to the case where n equals 1, because a unit vector in one dimension can be plus 1 or minus 1. So here I would get the usual Ising model where you assign a variable plus 1 or minus 1 to each vertex of the lattice. And you would also recover for n equal 2 what we call the XY model. For n equal 3, it's called the Heisenberg model. So it's a model where n appears as a parameter and you can vary it freely. Okay, so this was the original model. It's called also the n vector model or one vector model. And then there was an observation by Dejean in 1972, who observed that if you make some sort of graphical expansion of the model in the n tends to 0 limit, then you can recover the model of self-abounding walks or polymers. And so by this way, he was able to compute or at least relate critical exponents and use field theory to study that. So this was a bit developed. And so, for instance, there is a paper by Domani, Mukamel, Ninois, and Schlimmer, I think, introduced a variant of the model of Stanley, where you change just a bit the parameters, which is such that when you define the model on a trivalent lattice, then there is an exact correspondence between the vector model and a loop model as the one I represented before, and exactly actually the model I represented before, where, for instance, on a honeycomb lattice, you put loops on the honeycomb lattice and with a weight n per loop. And this correspondence is exact at any value of n, and not only in the n to 0 limit. So, and then there was a start of a huge development in the 80s, where physicists were interested in studying this model and all possible variants on a regular lattice, and used all their techniques like Coulomb gas, integrability, conformal field theory, Bethe-Ansatz, etc. So one name which happens in many papers is Nienhuis and his collaborator Henk Blöte, Murray Batchelor, etc. But there is a huge number of people working on that. So the variant where the model is defined a random map appeared in the 90s, and the first paper was by Kostov, who introduced this model and showed that it appeared it could be studied by a matrix integral techniques. So there is an expression for a partition function of the model, which I will write down later, as a matrix integral. And then it was also at the same time as development as a quantum gravity technique. So at this time, the model was studied, solved in some cases, the partition function was found, critical exponents were computed using techniques, and here is a list of people who have been, a partial list of people who have been working on this topic. And then, okay, maybe I forgot something else, and later on there has been a paper by Sheffield and Werner who introduced the conjectural scaling limit of the model at a critical point, and it's called conformal loop ensembles. And it is also believed that if you want to describe the scaling limit in some sense of a model of random maps, you should couple conformal loop ensembles to Liouville quantum gravity. And we will come back to that. I would like to point out also that the purpose of this big slide was to be able to write down the name of a French Nobel Prize winner and a French field medalist on the same page, and a page which is not an open letter sent to the French president to complain about budget cuts and everything. So here is a slide where both names and talk about science and not money. Okay, so now let me go to the formal definition of the ON model on random maps. So I guess, as everyone has said before me, except the first one who talked about random maps, I need not define what is a rooted random planar map. Here is the definition in case you have been not here before. So I will consider such a rooted planar map, and by convention I just orient an edge. So it's I draw my maps in the plane, and I orient an edge, and the right of the root edge should be the outer face. And I will be mostly interested in the case of triangulation. So here is an example of a triangulation with a boundary. So it means that every inner face has 3 sides. You allow for, I don't know if I have examples. No, maybe I have multiple edges, or no, I'm not sure. No loops here in this example. But okay, the triangulation is a map where each inner face has a degree 3. Okay, so and then I want to put on top of this model, I want to put loops. And the way I will do it is not just by drawing loops on the lattice itself, but I will draw them on the dual lattice. So it's just a convention. So you could think about the dual map, and then you would have a regular ON model. This is just a convention because it makes some decomposition more convenient. And you might observe that, as I said before, the model on triangulation is special because there was this exact mapping with a vector model, and here the dual of a triangulation is a trivalent map, and so for this kind of maps you have the exact mapping that I was mentioning. So this is one, the model on triangulation is particular, even though you could consider different kind of maps, and we believe that would have the same, you would find the same universality class. So there is the external face, and to make things simpler, I consider that there is no loop going in the outer face. And what will be a configuration of my model will be just a map which is endowed with a loop configuration this way. So now I want to put a probability measure, statistics on do statistical physics. So I will assign a probability to such a configuration. And the way I do it, okay, so as I said, I will restrict to the case where the map is a triangulation with a boundary. And I will assign a weight to each such configuration. So the weight is written here, but maybe I will try to remember. So the weight of configuration will be n, as I said, is the number of loops of my configuration. Then I have a parameter g to the number of unvisited triangle. So maybe I should point out that actually you can see that there are, because the loops are, there are exactly two kinds of triangles. There are triangles which are not visited by a loop and triangles which are visited. So when a triangle is visited by a loop, it is this way. So there is one edge going in and one edge going out. And basically, my parameter g is the weight I put for unvisited triangle, and h for visited triangle. So unvisited times h. Sorry, I'm not able to write on a line. And for convenience, I introduce an extra weight, which is actually redundant because I'm considering actually you can reabsorb it in G and H by the Euler relation, but it's convenient as a control parameter. So e to the volume. What I call the volume will be the number of vertices of a map. So here, all this monomial in NGHU is the weight I assign to one map.
Sorry, the last term does not depend on the loop's configuration.
Sorry?
The last term does not depend on the loop.
Yes, it only depends on the map. Yes, exactly. And then I will define the partition function as the sum of weights. And I will restrict to maps which have an outer degree which is controlled. So I fixed that's what you could call a model on a disk. You could think as it has the topology of a disk, and the disk has perimeter L. And so that's what I call FL. That's my definition of my.
That's the question. So you say disk, but do you allow articulation points?
Yes, I allow that. Yes. It's a general. So yes, you can have so you can have you could have this thing. The outer face could do like this, or etc. Branch all this way. So I do not suppose the boundary to be simple. Okay. So if the parameters n, g, and u, I take them as non-negative real parameters, are such that this sum is convergent. And this is, you can show that this is the case when they are small enough. Then we say the model is well defined because you can normalize the weight. You divide the weight by the partition function. And so this gives you the probability of a configuration in the model. We say also that is, you see it at a critical point. So in my definition, but it's actually equivalent to the definition that Timothy gave, is when you increase one parameter, and here the parameter which we select one parameter which is here, is the parameter u, the weight per vertex. If you increase it only a tiny, then you become ill-defined. So the partition, so in some sense, it means that you are at the convergence radius of a series in U. So this is what we call the critical point. If you are well defined and you are not at the critical point, we say you are at a subcritical point. It is not difficult to see that L, it doesn't depend on L, well, except of course if L is 0, because F0 by convention there is only the vertex map, so F0 equal 1. But for any L which is positive, then they all diverge at the same time. Okay, so let me, so to characterize I say that the interest of this model is that it has a rich critical behavior, lots of scaling limits, universality classes. So this is usually characterized by critical exponents. So usually we prefer to be close to a point where u equal 1 because, as I said, u is redundant. So u is just a parameter just to control the approach to criticality. So suppose that we have parameters n, g, h, such that the model is at a critical point at for u equal 1. Then you can define two kind of, there are two main critical exponents that you can define. The one is the one we call the volume exponent. It corresponds, well, in terms of series, it corresponds to taking u to be just slightly smaller than 1 and seeing how the generating function becomes singular as u tends to 1. Equivalently, it's the same as asking that what is in the partition function, what is the contribution of maps with a fixed volume. So in the series FL, I pick up the contribution from map which have a volume V, and I ask how this thing behaves as the volume V tends to infinity. If you were at a subcritical point, then because you are below the convergent radius, it would decay exponentially. When you are at a critical point, it doesn't decay exponentially anymore. It decays with an polynomial exponent. And by convention, in the literature, this exponent should be written gamma string minus 2, or gamma, let's call it gamma for short. Gamma minus 2, where gamma is called the string susceptibility exponent, or volume exponent. Okay, so this is one thing. It controls the way the partition function of maps with a given volume decays at infinity. There is another one which says how the partition function varies as we increase the perimeter, what we call the perimeter exponent. So I don't know if it has a well-defined name, so we chose the simplest letter we could find, so it's A. And so here is what happens when FL, you sit at the critical point, so u equal 1, and you let L tend to infinity, and it has a behavior like this. There is an exponential part with a constant which is not universal, so not so interesting. The interesting part is the sub-exponent, the polynomial correction, which is universal. The A is universal, and you can note that actually this exponent can also define that subcritical points. There is no FL is also defined at subcritical points, so it has a value at subcritical points. Okay, and so what turns out to happen is that for a fixed value of n in the range 0,2, so notice that by definition I can take n contrary to the vector model definition where n had to be an integer. In the loop formulation, n can be any real parameter, so I can take it in particular in the range 0,2. And what is known about this is that these exponents can only take a finite number of values, which are rational functions not of n, but of a related parameter, which I will denote b. Maybe I should write it down. I will write it on the other side. Maybe I will write the formula in the other way. N equal 2 cos pi of b. And b is in the range 0, 1 half, while n is in the range 0, 2. So, what turns out? So this has been known essentially rigorously since the solution of the model in the 90s, but we provide a discussion of that in our papers. So what are the possible values? Actually, there are 3 of them if you are interested in critical points, and 4 if you allow for a subcritical point. So the volume exponent at the generic critical point is the same as for maps without decoration, as has been discussed in other talks, and it has the value minus 1 half. But you have also 2 different kinds of critical points, the so-called dilute point, critical point, and the dense critical points, where it can take the value minus b and the value minus b over 1 minus b. And the model, the exponent, of course, not defined for subcritical point. And the same is true for the perimeter exponent. So it's known that for the generic case, it's 5 half. For subcritical point, it's 3 half because essentially it corresponds to the geometry of a tree with a large boundary. And then the dilute and dense critical points are given by these 2 values, 2 plus b and 2 minus b. So, okay, so here we make the assumption that you are at a critical point, so you can wonder. Sorry, is there a question? So you can wonder whether this happens. And actually, this is encoded in a phase diagram that you can actually derive exactly for the model that I've been considering. So I fix the value of n. I fix u equal 1, and then I can ask for which value of g and h I am subcritical, critical, or supercritical if you want, or the model is not well defined. In the GH plane, the curve has this, the phase diagram has this shape. So there is a line of critical points which go from the horizontal axis to the vertical axis. So this point of the horizontal line corresponds to triangulation without loops, because you take h2 is 0, so you forbid this kind of loops. So this point corresponds to critical point for triangulation without loops. But then you add loops, and so this critical point moves. And so it is a generic critical point because it corresponds to map without loops. So it remains generic in the vicinity of this point, and so it makes a line. And then there is a point where you jump to a different universality class. Right at the transition, you get what you call the dilute critical point, and then you get then a line of points all in the same universality class, all with the same exponent, which is called dense. And then below this line, of course, the model is subcritical. Beyond this line, it is not defined, because you increase the weight, so then the partition function diverges. So let me point out that this is the picture is only interesting for n between 0 and 2, because for n larger than 2, and this is related to the Mermin-Wagner theorem, there is no more critical point in 2 dimensions, and so in this model you would have only generic critical points. So only this line, and this new universality class would disappear. Okay. Okay, so let me just make a comment on the collection with the ON model on a regular lattice. Is that these dilute and dense critical points are also obtained, similar to universality class are obtained on a regular lattice. So here the phase diagram is different because you have only a 1D phase diagram, where because here on the maps you have these GH parameters to correspond to two different things. There is one which is somehow the cosmological constant, something which controls the size of the maps, and one which controls the area covered by loops. So on a regular lattice, you have no cosmological constant. Usually you take the infinite volume limit. And so there is only one parameter, which will be essentially the analog of h, which could be not the weight per loop, but the weight per edge in a loop. So when it's small, you penalize a lot the presence of loops, and when it's large, you would essentially force loops to pass everywhere. And it has the phase diagram is similar, but only in one dimension. So it's as if you were traveling along this line. So you would have, well, here it would be a non-critical model. Then there is a critical value where you get the dilute critical point. And beyond, you have a dense critical phase. Dense in the sense that correlation decay polynomially. And in terms of loops, the idea is that in this phase, you have very small loops. The loops are, because h is small, the loops are penalized, so there are very small loops. On the contrary, in the dense case, and at the extreme, when h tends to infinity, you have really loops that try to pass everywhere, and which are dense, essentially pass everywhere in the model. And at the dilute point is the transition between them, where you start to have large loops, but they are not space filling as in the dense model. Okay. And so, in the 80s, the physicists have studied this model and obtained dilute and transition and tried to get the critical exponent and found that there are still rational functions of the parameter b. Well, at this time, people were not using so much b as another parameter which was called the Coulomb gas coupling constant, and which can be written in this way: g equal 1 plus b in the dilute phase. So you notice that it's then g is between 1 and 3/2, because b is 0 and 1/2. And in the dense phase, it's between 1/2 and 1. So if you read papers from this era, you have to make this dictionary. And in particular, if you are interested, I mentioned the central charge, and the central charge is is a simply defined function of G given by this formula. And if you believe in the correspondence with CLE, then the kappa parameter is given by 4 over G. It's really simple. And I would point out that in particular, this value for the gamma exponent is predicted by the so-called Knizhnik-Polyakov-Zamolodchikov predict relation between critical exponent on regular lattice and the one on random maps. And let me show the table where I fill the central charge in the gamma. The KPZ relation, predict relation between the gamma and the C, and it's in a perfect agreement. So actually, the ON model could be used as a check for these relations. Because on the one hand, the model has been solved exactly on random maps. On the other hand, it's also essentially solved on a regular lattice. And let me point out that then as b tend to 1/2, you tend to the generic critical point where kappa is believed to be 1/3. Okay, so let me introduce some new exponents which will be useful in the following. And let me point out that one of the motivations for our work is to understand things beyond the critical exponents. So we don't know a lot about the geometrical properties of the ON configuration at critical point. Well, I didn't mention that a few months ago, Timothy Budd made a talk at IHP where he starts to have also some results, interesting results, and I hope that they will be published soon. So something will be known. Well, in particular, what I would, the main open question I would say is that if you consider maps to have a given large volume, then you would like to know something about the typical distances, the radius, or the two-point function between vertices. And it's believed as often that it should be a certain exponent of the volume V. It should scale, and the inverse of the exponent should be the fractal dimension or Hausdorff dimension if you are very optimistic. But I would like to point out that even among physicists, there is doesn't seem to be yet a consensus on what should be DH. We expect it to depend on N or on B, but we don't know what it is. So what in the paper in the series of papers of 2012 with Gaëtan and Emmanuel, what we did is we got information about the geometry not of the full configuration, but just on part of it, and what we call the gasket of ON configurations. So that is the maps which is formed by the edges which are outside all the loops. So here is a configuration. You erase what is inside the loop. So here former loops are shown in green, but the map in the gasket is the map in black. So it's a map which is no longer a triangulation, but a map which can have large faces, arbitrarily large faces. And so what we were able to say something about the geometry of these maps. Well, what we say more precisely is that if you are sitting at the critical point, the gasket is distributed as a Boltzmann map with large faces, which has been studied by Jean-François Le Gall and Grégory Miermont, in the paper of 2012, where they showed in particular that these objects have different scaling limits from the Brownian map. In particular, I guess it's you know that the scaling limit exists, but we don't know yet whether it's unique. But any limit has a Hausdorff dimension, which should be given by this formula. The Hausdorff dimension of the gasket should be 3 plus 2b and 3 in the dilute phase and 3 minus 2b in the dense phase. Okay. So this is one, if you want, it's one critical exponent which characterizes the gasket, the geometry of the gasket. What we did in a, oh sorry, it should be a D. Sorry Bertrand. In our lesson paper, we introduced another critical exponent which characterizes the probability if you take an ON configuration of fixed volume V and you pick a vertex at random, so one among the V vertices, that it belongs to the gasket. And it's what we showed is that at a non-generic critical point, this probability decays still with an exponent, which I call nu. I don't know if it's a good name, nu. That's the one we've chosen, which has two possible values in the dilute and dense phase. Actually, it's very close, but in the dense phase, you have this 1 minus b. Okay. Okay. So let me show this. Increase the size of my table. So I have always the same exponent, and now you have the dimension of a gasket. And notice that it interpolates between the known Hausdorff dimension of maps without loops, which is 4, which is obtained as b tends to 1/2. And then on the other range, as b tends to 1/2, here you go to 2, which would be the Hausdorff dimension of trees. So you will have something which goes from trees to Brownian trees to Brownian maps. And the new exponent, so here the one I showed, and essentially here it should be 0 on both sides because you expect, and actually that's what we show, is that for when you are at either at a generic critical point or a subcritical point, the probability to be in the gasket tends to a finite limit, so it doesn't decay. Because the loops are very small, then you have a non-zero probability of being in the gasket. Okay, and maybe not something which is not a full coincidence is that notice that what is a bit puzzling is that the gamma exponent is different, and here you have to divide by 1 minus b to go from that to there, and here you make the same division. You go from here to there by dividing by 1 minus b, and this will appear again. Okay, so let me now go back to the core, to arrive at the core of our work, which was interested in the study of nestings. So, because we are not able to say something about the distances, we study another problem, which is the study of the structure of nesting between loops. So here is a sample representation of configuration of the on-loop model. So we do not represent the map anymore, but we represent it as a surface with loops living on it. And you see that because the surface is has the topology of a disk or a sphere, then the nesting, the loops, well, they cannot cross each other, so they can be, if the outer face or the boundary is there, you can just ask whether two loops can be nested within each other or can be non-nested within each other, like these two things. And this information is coded by a tree, which is, well, I don't know if it's a dual tree. So to this kind of configuration, you can associate a tree, which we call the nesting tree, where the nodes of a tree correspond to the components of the surface you obtain by cutting along the loops. And the edges describe the components which touch each other along an edge. So for instance, well, if you look at is it clear for everyone? So in particular, what I defined as the gasket was the component containing the root. So it would be the root of a tree. So in red, the gasket would correspond to this node. So the gasket would be the component comprised between these loops. And then, because in the gasket you find two outermost loops, then the node has two children, and then you come to two different components. So this one you arrive to this component, and this component within this component you find yet another loop that is nested. So that's why you have one children, and then there is no more loop, so you stop here, etc. So and then you iterate. Here you see that you have a leaf because there is this loop, and then you have loops nested within each other. You have two loops, so that's why you have these two things. And then you have a series of three nested loops, so that's why you have this branch of 1, 2, 3. So that's why. So the question you can ask is, what is the structure of the nesting tree at a critical point? So if you use our combinatorial decomposition, what you can see rather easily at combinatorial level is that this tree can be described as what I could call multi-type branching process or Kelton-Watson process with types, but the difficulty is that there is an infinite number of types, because in order to get, you have some information to be kept tracked if you want to compute enumeration or probability. Maybe I will come back to that later. And you have to keep track of the length of the boundaries and the length of loops. And the length of the loops can be arbitrarily large, so you have infinitely many types. So I guess there is no Not a lot of theory known about that. It's not so easy. I point out that in the next talk, Lin Xiao will talk about a work where they're able to analyze at least a scaling limit, I think, of this model. So here, what we did in our work was to consider a simpler question. So we take an ON configuration with a given volume, and again, we choose a vertex at random, and we ask what is its depth, what is the number of loops separating it from the boundary, outer boundary. So in this example, suppose that I choose a vertex, and my vertex is here. And I have to go from here to the boundary, I have to cross 3 loops. There are 3 loops that wind around, that separate around the two, that separate the things. So if you're interested, the component that is written here corresponds to this node. Okay. So in the tree, you are considering the height of a node in a tree, but notice that what you are not taking a node at random, but you are taking a node with a proportional, with a probability which is proportional to its volume in the map. So it's not the uniform distribution over nodes, but it's rather a uniform distribution over vertices in the map. So it's, of course, some nodes are bigger than, correspond to bigger components than others. So it's just one partial information. Okay. And so now I can state my result because what we have is information about this depth. And so what we find is that at a critical point, at a non-generic critical point, I should say, the depth is of order log of v. And we have a more precise statement. It's some sort of central limit theorem. So I consider a configuration of the ON loop model with a fixed volume V and a perimeter L. And I let P of VL be the depth of uniformly chosen vertex within this configuration. Then we show that, this scales, this is essentially, for the law of large numbers, it's log of V times the prefactor, which is constant. And there are fluctuations of order square root of log V. If I divide by fair fluctuation, I get a normal distribution. And we get explicit factors. So here is my parameter C, which is not the central charge, but it's the choice that we made. And it's the same as before. So it's, recall what I said, there is this parameter C equal 1 in the dilute phase and 1 over 1 in the dense phase. So if you want to have a memory, so the gamma string parameter is minus C times B. If you think, you recall the table of critical exponents. Minus B times C. And this is true in both phases. Or that's just one way to think about it. Okay. We just show it because it allows to write a formula that is valid both in the dilute phase and in the dense phase. We don't have to distinguish cases. So there is this factor. There is a prefactor which depends on n also, which has this form, n over square root over n. And the variance is also given a function of n and c. Well, everything is a function of b at the end. Okay, so this is for the central limit theorem, and we have other information, or actually more general result about large deviations. So we consider the probability that at a non-generic critical point, this depth of a uniformly chosen vertex is proportional to log v, but with a factor c times p, which is different from v. If you want optimum value, you want to force it to be different. And here we have a large deviation principle. So it's proportional to, it scales as v tends to infinity as a constant times this factor, and v to the power of something which is a large deviation function. So c is the same as before. And here we have a function that depends on p. P is a parameter which we say finite, or maybe even up to order log v. And it has this explicit form, j of p. My large deviation function is this expression, which is the way it is. So let me make some remark and make a plot. So we have, let me point out that here we fixed the perimeter to be fixed and small. Well, it doesn't scale with n, but we have a similar statement when you allow the perimeter to be large, and the correct order of magnitude is v to the power c over 2. So it's V for V to the 1/2 in the dilute phase and V to something else in the dense phase. And actually, we find the same large deviation function up to factor 2. We can also generalize the result to the case where we do not mark a vertex, but we make something more symmetric. So that is, we have a boundary and we mark another face, which could be large, and which makes another. So you would have considered an ON configuration with what we could call a cylinder with 2 marked faces, and you would consider how many loops separate above. So the large deviation function, of course, is non-negative. It vanishes at the optimal point, at the point where corresponding to the central limit theorem. It looks transcendental, but actually the second derivative is just a rational function, so it's quite simple. It grows linearly as p tends to infinity. And for g equals 0, it takes the value arcsine n over 2. That's just a simple exercise. If you simplify it, it takes this value. And this is consistent with the exponent nu that I introduced before, because of course it would correspond to the probability to be. It corresponds to the whole scale of the probability to be in the gasket when p equals 0. This corresponds to saying that the point is in the gasket or close to it, and so this should give the gasket exponent. So that's here. So, and one thing we can do, and I hope that Bertrand will not be too unhappy with the way I present things, because he's the expert on that, is the fact that this, interestingly, this theorem, this large deviation principle, can be compared to a similar result, which has been obtained by Jason Miller, Samuel Watson, and David Wilson, so quite recently, about what is called the multifractal spectrum of extreme nesting in CLE kappa. Okay, so let me risk myself to say something about that. So just in one slide. So it will be an analogous quantity, large deviation principle, for the number of loops that surround. So here you would consider, I don't know, you would consider a CLE. So of course I do not say what is a CLE. So it would be in a disk, say in a disk, and so you would have loops, random loops in within, and because it's a continuous model, there are infinitely many loops of small sizes. And what you do is that you choose a point at somewhere. Well, and if you just ask, so you are in a disk, in the unit disk, say, and if you ask how many loops wind around a given point in the middle, the answer is infinite, because there can be, in this model, there are loops that can be arbitrarily small. So what you have to do is to regularize things, and to get something finite, you have to take a small ball of radius epsilon around the point, and then the number of loops that do not enter this loop but remain inside is now finite, and you can ask how does it behave as epsilon tends to 0. And the answer is that it scales, again, logarithmically with epsilon. And there is a large deviation principle, and that's essentially what is the multifractal spectrum as far as I understand. And so this was the result. And our observation, which is actually an observation by Bertrand, is that now you can translate that and compare it to the model of random maps. What you have to do is to replace this, well, you have to consider a CLE, and you have to couple it with a Liouville quantum gravity, whatever it is. So CLE plus L2G. So on top of this model, you have a random measure which corresponds to Liouville quantum gravity. And what you do is that you now want to measure a ball, not by its radius, but by what you call its quantum area. So there is a relation between quantum area and radius, but it's a random relation, so there is a multifractal spectrum, etc. And essentially, there is what Bertrand called, I guess, the KPZ map, which gives a relation between that. So what you have to do is take their large deviation principle and translate it into something else. So here is I risk myself to make a statement. So you consider a CLE kappa coupled to Liouville quantum gravity with a gamma which is given by the appropriate parameter. So actually, to compare the result I stated, you should not be on the disk, but you should be on the Riemann sphere. So it should correspond to a case where I am on sphere, and I have or it's in the wool plane if you want. And I want to I fix a point, and on the sphere I think it doesn't depend on the point that you fix. And I want to I increase the radius of I consider my point, and I increase its radius until it gets a quantum measure, a Liouville measure equal to delta. And then I stop there, and then I ask how many loops wind around it. And so that's my random variable delta. And then the thing is, you ask how does this thing scale as delta tend to 0. And you write down the large deviation principle. So n delta equal to c times p over pi. So p is a parameter, c is the same as before, and log of 1 over delta. And the result, which is actually, so it's a theorem in our paper, but it's all done by taking the result from Miller, Watson, Miller, and applying the KPZ map in a suitable way, is that there is still a large deviation principle, and the exponent, it has exactly the same large deviation function as before. So c over pi, j of p, and the same here. So which is quite remarkable. And you can say that it's an evidence that the conjecture that scaling limits of critical ON model on random maps is indeed described by serially coupled to Liouville quantum gravity. It goes me. Okay, so now I have what, 10 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, in 10 minutes I would like just to give an idea of the proof of theorems 1 and 2, so about the map, and actually I will try not to make too many computation because I'm not very good at it. But so let me say that what are the main ingredients. So the first ingredient is our gasket decomposition, which I already mentioned, which was in our paper of 2012. Then there is we noticed that you could refine this approach to keep track of the depth of random vertex. And then once you are in business, you get a functional equation, you solve it. Well, actually, Gaëtan solves it. And you get the corresponding generating function. You compute exactly. You have an expert of electric parametrization, so you do everything, you tweak it. And then you do analytic combinatorics or asymptotics, and you get what you want. So here I will just talk about the first two parts, which are essentially combinatorics. So let me recall what is the gasket decomposition. So here I take a map. So here, sorry, I just took slides from an old presentation. So it's no longer a triangulation, but it's a quadrangulation that makes no difference. So you start with a configuration of ON loop model. And what you do is that you notice that because the model has the loops live on the dual lattice, they form what you like to call a necklace. You consider the faces that are visited by loops, so it's a sequence of faces which touch each other and form necklaces. Okay. So what do you do? Then you cut along these necklaces. So the necklaces have two sides, one inner and two contours, one inner. And so you cut along both sides of the necklace. In particular, you do it along each outermost loop. So the gasket is the part which is the remain outside. So it is a map without loops and with the same outer degree as the origin map. The necklace, okay, it's just a sequence of polygons which are glued each other to form a line. And the observation is what is inside is what I call an internal configuration. So what is inside, for instance, inside this necklace, I get this part, and inside the other loop I get this part. Both of them are maps with a boundary. So to give a practical example to Mireille, this is a possible configuration. And now the boundary is not simple, but it's possible. So that's why it was important to allow for any type of boundary here. So it's a configuration, and there can be still nested loops inside, so other loops. So it has the same nature as the original object that I was decomposing. Okay, there is a technicality that objects can be routed in such a way, etc. Okay, so the end main thing is that you have a bijection between configuration and a gasket which is decorated by necklaces in internal configuration. So maybe let me go back. Sorry. I don't know if it's very reasonable to do that, but to this picture. So to get a bijection, so the gasket, which is the map in black, if you go from a configuration to a gasket, you lose information. To get a bijection, you need to remember what the ghost part in green, corresponding to what was inside of the loops, and this is given by the data of necklaces and internal configurations. Okay. So if you want to be precise, the gasket is a map whose face are either, in the gasket you can have either, you can have regular faces which are faces of the original map, or what I call holes, which corresponds to the big holes that have been left by a. And then in each hole, you have to put inside first a necklace and then an internal configuration. So each hole of degree k, you put a necklace of outer length k. Each necklace of inner length, you put inside an internal configuration of outer degree k. Okay, so this is bijection. So now you can translate that into equations and enumeration. So you need to introduce two things. So partition functions of maps without loops. So this long sounds complicated, but it's something that was better known than the normal if you want. So it corresponds to actually the Boltzmann map model that Timothy has been discussing. So it corresponds to partition function for a model of maps without loops, but with an infinite sequence of parameters. So here we add also the parameter u, which is redundant, which is the volume. But the important part is that you control the degrees of the faces. So you put a parameter g, k, per inner face of degree k. So this is a partition function which depends on infinitely many parameters. So this is the first thing you need in your equation. And the second one is to count necklaces. So it's a generating function for necklaces. So think about it. This counts the part of the maps which have no loops, this partition function, and this one corresponds to the part covered by loops, so necklaces. In the case of triangulation, which is the one interested here, this necklace, by a simple combinatorial agreement, you just look at how many sequence of triangulations, triangles you can make to make a necklace. You get a binomial factor times this parameter h. So it has a simple rational expression. Okay. So translate that into equation. Maybe I will go fast. So let me just give the end result. You do it. And let me go to the proposition, which was on a previous paper. It is that the partition function of the ON loop model is actually equal to the partition function for the model of Boltzmann maps, so maps without loops but control face degrees, where you take parameters, face weights, which are given by which are not explicit, but given by a recursive condition or fixed point condition, that they should be equal to jk of 0, which would be the weights per uncovered faces. So if you are interested in the model on triangulation, it should be simply equal to j if the face has degree 3, and 0 otherwise. So this is the weight for triangles that appear here. All the other ones are 0. Get this. What is not easy, what is not difficult to check is that this equation has indeed a unique solution as a power series that you obtain by iterating, if you want, this equation as a Sphinx point. And a consequence also of this is that, what I claimed previously, that the gasket is distributed according to the Boltzmann measure for maps without loops, with these weights which are solution to this equation. Okay. And now here is the new ingredient for nestings. So I take this equation, this identity, so this fixed point equation, and I will differentiate it with respect to u, to the weight per vertex. So differentiate with respect to u, it means that I mark a vertex in terms of general function. So now you do it, and you have to derive with respect to u, but you have to apply the chain rule, because here you have to differentiate with respect to the explicit variable u, but you also have to notice that the gk, which are solution of my fixed point equation, also depend implicitly of u by this way, so you also have to consider the derivatives of gk with respect to u. So if I apply the chain rule, what I get is that what I call FL dot, so the generating function for ON configuration with a marked vertex, by the chain rule, here is the part you obtain by doing the differentiating with respect to the explicit variable u, which corresponds to pointed maps without loops, or you have to differentiate with respect to the parameter, say, gk, And then you have to, so I have to consider the derivative dgk divided by du. So you have to different, so the derivative here is 0 because this does not depend on u, but I get a derivative here which is here. And I notice that the part I get here is just the original thing. Okay, maybe I will not enter too much into the detail. There is a part which is the derivative of, you have to introduce another object, which is the derivative of FL with respect to the variable gk, which corresponds to cylinders, so maps with one outer face of degree L and another marked face of degree k. So that's what you get. And now, notice that this equation, that was obtained by computation, has a combinatorial meaning. Because it says that I have a configuration with a mark point. I point in my configuration, and there are two cases. Either the mark point can fall into the gasket, so this corresponds to the first term, or it falls within, so maybe I will go back, or maybe I will do a picture. No, okay, let's say it in Word. So it falls within, not within a gasket, but within a loop. And then there is one, it is contained in exactly one, so my, either it falls in the gasket or it does not fall in the gasket, in which case there is a unique loop which separate unique outermost loop separating from the outer boundary. And so I can make the decomposition as follows. I consider the part which is outside of this exterior loop, and this is a map without loops, but two boundaries, so what I call a cylinder. Then I get a necklace, and then I get an internal map, is still a pointed map, which corresponds to what happened inside. Okay, and that's the combinatorial meaning. And now you notice that with this equation, you can make a refinement. You can take this equation, and you can just add a new parameter. I multiply just, in this recursive equation, I just multiply by s. I put an extra parameter s, and so it defines the recursive equation defining FL dot of s. It's the solution of this. FL dot of s is this. And the combinatorial meaning, which is hopefully clear at this point, is that this parameter s counts the number of loops which surround the marked vertex. And so it measures its depth. By a similar ID, you can also count cylinders, all of that. So pictorial representation is that this parameter s count, so if you consider a cylinder, you have two marked faces, and the parameter s is, and this is essentially like a transfer matrix relation. Tell you that you can iterately compute this thing by recursion. So you say, you consider the outermost loop which separates the two things, and then you cut, etc. So it has a meaning. And the final thing is that you just notice, well, in this I don't say anything about it, is that this functional equation you can be solved by a direct generalization of all the methods that we used for the non-refined case. So from that you go to explicit expression, all that you do the asymptotics, and the theorem follows. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I want to give you some extra time. I think your article is around 70 pages long, right? So can you tell what are the main technical difficulties?
So here everything is easy, so that's what I did. So the main technical difficulty is just that, well, okay, no, you have to solve this equation, so this is another thing. So so what we do is that this you cannot solve, but you have to introduce do yet another Laplace transform with respect to a variable L. So you have to introduce a generating function, what we call the resolvent, or you introduce what I call f of z, which is the sum over all parameters of f L. And then, well, actually, it's better to work with as a series in 1 over z. So you consider this function, and then you do your. Well, there are things that are known. The things that are known is that, well, and of course there is a similar expression for maps without loops. And there is something that is lots of things are known about the analytic structure of this function as a function of z. It's known that, well, here it is defined as as a series around z equal infinity, if you want, a series in 1 over z. But it's an analytic function in the whole complex plane. So this one is known for any gk, etc., any weights, such that the model is well defined. So these things are finite. It is known that it's an analytic function in the z plane. So you are looking at its series expansion around infinity, but it is analytic in the whole complex plane except on a cut where it has a discontinuity. Otherwise, it's finite everywhere. So you know the analytic structure of that. By this relation, this one, you deduce that that is also true for this geometric function. And now, and not only you can do that, but you can translate this functional equation, this fixed point condition, into an equation for f of z. And the answer is that there are different equations. It follows from Tutt's equation for maps without loops. What is known is that this function has a discontinuity here, but there is a functional equation which says that on the cut, so the cut usually I put endpoints that I call gamma plus minus, nothing to do with the gammas before, but you know that f of z on this cut, for when z is in a cut on the real axis. So I should point out that the gamma plus is the dominant singularity of the series. It corresponds to, actually the singular behavior on this point corresponds to the boundary critical exponent I was saying, because it controls maps with it's what happens when you have maps with a large degree. Okay, so on the cut, there is the functional equation for maps without loops that it's not the discontinuity, but it's the sum of the two values of a function. So it's discontinuous. You have for z on the cut, it has two determinations, one above and one below. And you make the sum of the two. And what follows actually from Tutt's equation is that it's simply given by as a simple function. So I hope I make no mistake, but I think it's something like this. Maybe there is a z and z minus 1 or something. Maybe there is a polynomial part. And by this equation is actually fully sufficient to deduce the solution, knowing that also f of z scales as 1 over z as z tends to infinity. Okay, so this is for maps without loops. But now you substitute the fixed point condition. And now you see that in the fixed point condition, my gk will take that. And I have a of k, which is written before, is here. And if you go to the series, it has a pole, it is a rational function. So this sum, okay. So this sum translates as the sum that I am doing here is translated as a contour integral. You evaluate it using the residue theorem, etc. And what you get is this following equation. Well, there is one part which doesn't, so if I just change round f into big F for the Johan-Monod model, I get a part which doesn't change, which corresponds to their weights, and then there is an extra part which depends on f, right? And actually, it turns out that it is n. I hope I make no mistake, but I think it's n. And if you do the residue, it's the value. It's a functional equation. It's a value of f at another point than at the beginning. So it's at a point which is the image by reflection. Sorry, my picture is not so good, but you have a reflection of this thing. So you are left to solve this kind of equations. And now the elliptic parametrization trick gets in. That is, you can rewrite this as you can introduce a clever parametrization of this. Well, you are working essentially with a problem like this. You have two cuts in the complex plane. So an idea is to homogenize or do a Riemann mapping to a torus. That's the topology of the torus. And then you get an equation. You can solve it using elliptic functions. So that's it, and then at the end you arrive to an elliptic parametrization of f, and then the last part is to do asymptotics to perturb, to see how it changes, how the solution is perturbed when you fix the parameters. So that's the rough idea.
You tried to do something without computing explicit functions, because maybe, or because usually for this complex stuff you don't really need to have an explicit solution. And I don't know if that would be easier or not, maybe it's not possible.
Yeah, that requires to be a probabilist, maybe. Probabilists don't like to compute, but they like to have clever tricks, and I might not be so clever. And I don't know. That's I don't know if. Well, actually, we bumped into this difficulty that otherwise you have a process with infinite many types. What can you say? I mean,